Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by Royal Retros, the king of throwbacks. Hey, if you're looking for teams and leagues that don't exist anymore, but you'd like to remember them in high-quality jersey or uniform format, hey, some of those teams were legendary. Some of them were disasters, but they all live at Royal Retros. Check them out. RoyalRetros.com. Use that promo code SEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. Check them out now. And now, check out this episode.
And guess who? Trevor Francis can win it for Detroit. If he scores, it's all over. Here comes the goalie. There's the shot. Detroit has won by 6-5. Appropriately, the star of the team, one of the new sports heroes of the Detroit area, Trevor Francis from Nottingham Forest in England, has done it. What a long afternoon it's been. Just short of 2.5 hours of marvelous, exciting soccer. It wasn't sloppy, really, Paul. You might expect a 6-5 game would be, but there was a lot of good play.
There was a lot of good play, but as I say, the defenses were a bit loose. This is Francis' winning shot, right straight on the edge of the area, hit with the inside of his right foot as the goalkeeper dived under him, and again, just inside that post. We saw some errors, but we saw some excellent shooting, too.
Another look at Trevor Francis with the shot that won the game, just as he won the European Cup final for Nottingham Forest against Malmö of Sweden not too long ago. One final look at it.
He's going to be worn out before he's finished that.
Okay. Again, the final score is Detroit 6, Chicago 5.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, let's do this. How are you, everyone? My name is Tim Hanlon. As aforementioned, this is Good Seats Still Available. As you know by now, it's the curious little podcast that's devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thanks for finding us. And this week is no exception. The little clip there at the beginning gives you a hint. We're going back to the North American Soccer League, not exclusively, with our pal this week, Roger Faulkner, as we talk about the Detroit Express of the NASL, a team that Roger was instrumental in willing into being in 1978. And as we'll hear in our chat, a journey into the game of soccer, not necessarily as a profession, at least in the early days. You're going to hear an amazing story of a simple businessman doing pretty well for himself, thank you, being transported from his home in England to a job transfer to the Detroit metropolitan area back in the early 1970s, and being intrigued still with the game that he grew up loving in England, soccer, and trying to find some ways to bring that beautiful game into the Detroit metropolitan area, into the United States. And as you'll hear, a journey for sure, kind of innocently, kind of part-time, a night job, if you will, hardly a job. Trying to bring, for example, closed-circuit World Cup coverage to a couple of establishments in the Detroit area for people to watch this amazing international tournament that was largely unbeknownst to most average American sports fans. The latter part of the 70s, when 1976 in the Pontiac Silverdome, brand spanking new, bringing an exhibition game between the Dallas Tornado, Kyle Roach Jr. and friends, and the New York Cosmos with Pele. And that springboarding into what became an earnest desire, depending on who you talk to, whether it was from the league and Phil Woosnam or Roger and his investors in Detroit, or maybe a little of both, a franchise of their own in the NASL, starting in 1978, known as the Detroit Express. That clip that you just heard was a little bit of snippage from the end of a very exciting, one of the more exciting games, I think, in modern, if you can call it modern, NASL history. July 7th, 1979 in the Silverdome. And that was one of the handful of games that ABC television carried of the NASL. Yes, that's a whole story we've talked about on a number of different occasions, but it was a 3-year package that ABC had agreed to, where they only fulfilled really 2 years, and then the Soccer Bowl in 1981 was the only game that they carried then. But that's when Jim McKay and Paul Gardner were calling the action. A frenetic game between the Chicago Sting and the home standing Detroit Express. And you heard the end there of the shootout, and it was a 6-5 final score. Not of the shootout, but the game. There were 10 goals scored, and the shootout wound up determining who the winner was in the NASL's crazy cockamamie scoring system that essentially translated the shootout win into a quote-unquote goal to make the official score 6-5, even though there was really no sixth actual goal scored. But I digress. This is a great story. If we really finally get into the Detroit Express story, Trevor Francis, Roger Faulkner's relationship, good at the beginning and terrible at the end, with the well-known soccer commentator and pot stirrer Jimmy Hill. We get into more of the Silverdome in 1994 with that facility through Rogers' auspices and support and help and efforts. A handful of World Cup games, including the very memorable debut of the U.S. national team against the Swiss national team in a very hot and humid Silverdome. And you'll hear in our conversation that maybe that was by design, but I kind of digress a bit further. And all kinds of other stuff. And you're going to hear that Roger is probably one of the biggest and greatest figures in the American soccer scene over the last number of decades, not for whatever reason in the U.S. Soccer Hall of Fame. But perhaps after listening to this episode, you will be convinced, and perhaps also by buying a copy of his current book, which is a hoot and a half. It is called You Can't Get There From Here, My Soccer Journey from Derby to Detroit. And it is available now, as they say, wherever you get good books, in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle versions. It is published by our friends at Kohler Books, and you can, of course, get it probably most easily through one of the convenient links we have for you in the show description in your podcast feed catcher or whatever. Just click on that link, and you'll be whisked away to Amazon. We'll get a couple of shekels of referral love when you purchase it that way. Or you can go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, and you search up this episode numbered, 441, I believe it is. And you'll find the convenient links there. And again, either way, by clicking and buying in that general manner, we literally will get a couple of nickels and dimes of referral love, not much more. But look, hey, we don't ask very much from you, dear listener, to help us support the doings of this show. And, this stuff costs money. We got lights and electricity and bandwidth we got to do, distribution fees and all that kind of stuff, production costs. So it's the very least you can do. And I will tell you, in this case, you will not be disappointed with this book. And to the point where we're also going to give away 2 copies at the end of the show. We've got 2 promotional copies, courtesy of our friends at Kohler Books. If you listen to the end there, we'll have the trivia question, and we'll tell you how you can enter to win yourself a copy of this book. But don't let me continue to promote the heck out of it. Let me allow you to be the judge of all of this as we now segue nice and smoothly, into a wonderful chat that we had just a few weeks back with the wonderful and amazingly talented and story-rich Roger Faulkner. Here's our conversation. Please, as always, enjoy. Before we get to your, shall we say, crossing of the pond to get here, can you, for our audience, set up a little bit of a tone of your career and your life in England, in Great Britain, in Europe, because you kind of have some of the ingredients of some of the American sports entrepreneurs that we've talked to over the years in various sports. I'm curious as to what you were doing before this North American Soccer League idea even hit your radar.
Well, it's a strange story, really. I wasn't a soccer player in England. I played for my school team, but I was pretty bad. And I played centre forward, but there was a guy played inside left, and he played for England boys. He played at Wembley. He was brilliant. He used to give me these through balls, and I'd be one-on-one with the keeper from 30 yards out, and I'd score about 2 goals a game out of 20 chances, and I had to tell him to stop. So I wasn't much of a soccer player, but I was a tennis player, and I played on the European tennis circuit a little bit. the Irish Championships and Dutch Championships and so on. But then I was transferred to the United States by the company I had joined in England, Burroughs Corporation, which was a computer company. Didn't know it at the time, but it became a computer company and a very hot computer company. And they transferred us to Detroit. Came over here for a year's training. Must have been a very slow learner because I'm still here. But I was married to an Australian tennis player who played Wimbledon and Forest Hills and the US Open and so on. And she wasn't keen to go back to England, so the Burroughs asked me if I wanted to stay permanently in the US, or at least for the time being, stay in the US, and offered me a decent job. And so we settled down here, had put roots down, had two sons here, and eventually became U.S. citizens. But because of tennis, I joined a tennis club called the Franklin Club, and the general manager was a jovial giant of a man, an Englishman named Gordon Preston, who claimed he'd played for Bolton Wanderers as a backup centre forward to Nat Lofthouse, who played for England. His son told me that he'd never see Gordon hit with the ball without falling over, but he and I naturally started to talk about soccer as a nostalgia thing. Really, my team was Derby County, his was Bolton Wanderers, and we just talked soccer every time I was in the Franklin Club. And then one day he said, "We're going to put a game on. A group of friends are going to put a game on." And it's strange because the Cosmos has been an ever-present in my life throughout this whole Express story. But the first game we did was between Coventry City and Hertha of Berlin at Keyworth Stadium in Detroit, where Detroit City FC now play. And one of the players for Coventry City that day was Dave Clements, who subsequently went on, Northern Ireland international winger, subsequently went on to play for the New York Cosmos.
Oh yeah, he was a very foundational early person in that franchise's, shall we say, pre-superstar era.
Very, very much so. Very much so. In fact, when we did our first exhibition with the Cosmos, he came in as the advance man representing them with Shep Messing. So David was an absolute delightful Irishman, and in fact, we just got back in touch on Facebook. Somebody reintroduced us on Facebook. He's out in Colorado, but he's still healthy and enjoying life in America.
We may follow up with you to get that contact because because he went on to the was it the Caribous of Colorado?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So Gordon and I put on this Eintracht Hertha of Berlin Coventry City game, and then in 1970 we brought in the World Cup by shelling out the enormous amount of $5,000 for the Michigan rights to televise World Cup.
I'm sorry, this is close for our audience who
closed circuit.
This closed circuit stuff, right? Which is pre-internet, pre everything.
Absolutely. We put it on in a place called the Masonic Auditorium, and in Detroit, which has about probably 3,500 seats, just basically more of a cinema theater than a sports arena. But we put that on, and the day of the final, we hadn't sold any advance tickets. We were sitting up in the first level, the circle, feeling very miserable. And a friend of mine said, "I'm going to go outside and see if I can sell 2 of these tickets I've got left over." And he came back and he said, "I'm not going out there again. It's madness. There's thousands of people in the street out there." And we could have sold the place out twice over. So that was a successful experiment. But after that, nothing happened until I went down to the fireworks in Detroit in 1976, July 4th, and parked my car at a bar called the Lindell AC, which is a sports bar, and gave my keys to the attendant. And when I came back at the end of the fireworks, the attendant was gone, my keys were gone. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, so I went into the bar, and there is Gordon Preston. And he's sitting there, and we talk, and I like to think it was me, but I'm not sure whether it was or not, said, the Silverdome is now opened in Pontiac, and we ought to put a soccer game in there. And so it's by the time it's 1 o'clock in the morning after a few beers, everything seems like a good idea. And so we decided we would make calls. I called Lamar Hunt, who I knew in Dallas. I knew him through tennis. And he owned the Dallas Tornado. And Gordon called Clive Toy at the New York Cosmos. So lo and behold, on Labor Day of September 1976, we brought in the New York Cosmos and Dallas to play an exhibition at the Silverdome.
Right, so,
It
so
got off
let's back up for a second. So this is 1976, right? So
76, yeah.
I'm guessing that this is a promote. Okay, so it sounds like you're being dragged into sort of, if you will, on the peripheries of soccer, quote unquote, promotion, whatever that is in the early part of the decade, right?
Yeah.
How much did you know during this period between the 70 World Cup, closed circuit stuff and 1970? How aware were you of the NASL? Certainly the Detroit had a couple of nibbles of the pre NASL when the pro leagues were kind of trying to start up. And
yeah, we had the Detroit Cougars in 1968, which was owned by William Clay Ford and
sure, all those traditional sports owners who thought soccer was going to be the next big thing. But
because of the success of the '66 World Cup was so great. It actually made a little bit of noise over here, not much, but it made a little bit of noise. So people thought that maybe it's time to introduce it into the US. But
so I guess, yeah, I'm sorry. I guess my question though is like during that period of time between the 70 and 76 exhibition stuff. So how much did you know of the North American Soccer League? Did you follow it at all? And was this exhibition idea with the Pontiac Silverdome, a brand new structure, either in either of your minds to having some maybe appeal to the NASL to maybe consider Detroit as a franchise, or is this just
not when we put the game on? But by the time the game was over, yes, we were very interested in a franchise.
So at the bar, this is just a good idea.
At the bar, it was just a good idea, and let's see what happens. It was a major gamble on our part because when we put the numbers together and we decided we were going to need about 85,000 in capitalization to bring in Dallas and New York and so on, and I don't think any soccer game had ever had revenue of $20,000 in Michigan up to that point. So. And Gordon said, we can't possibly do this. And I said, well, I think we can. And I called together a group of friends from the club I belong to. And we raised $85,000 in an hour at my athletic club I belong to. So we put the game on. It was interesting. The Cosmos came up by plane to Detroit, and they'd come from Latin America. And they arrived at 10:30 at night at Detroit Metro Airport. And Mike Martin, the general secretary, got on the bus, the coach that we were on, and he sat next to me and he said, we have a problem. And I said, what's that? He said, well, we haven't eaten. This is 10:30 Sunday night in Detroit on a Labor Day weekend. And he said, we got to feed all these guys. And I said, well, that's impossible. So I got off the bus. We didn't have cell phones and found a payphone, and I called a restaurant in Bloomfield Hills here that a friend of mine owned, and I said, I need to get a dinner reservation. He said, it's impossible. We closed half an hour ago. We're just cleaning up. And I said, well, I got some friends I have to bring over. I have to give them dinner. And he said, well, how many are there? And I said, there's 34. And he said, no, don't be stupid. I said, well, one of them's Pele. And he said, all right, we're open. And so we went out and had dinner there, and I picked up a bill that was not in my budget. But the game itself was enormously successful. We had a crowd of 23,682, and Phil Woosnam came in, the commissioner, and he said, I didn't think you could do more than 15,000 with no team here, no Detroit team playing. And we got 23,000 and a record revenue for a soccer game in Michigan. So after that, I started getting calls from Steve Ross at Warner and Lamar Hunt in Dallas and Phil Woosnam, of course, saying, you have to consider getting a franchise.
There's a warning sign, but okay.
Well, that changed the direction of our thinking. And I was with Burroughs Corporation at that time, and I'd had a wonderful job. I was international manager of personnel manager of the international division. I traveled all over the world, the Far East and Latin America and Europe. A wonderful job. And then I got promoted to the fifth floor, which took me out of the international division and out of traveling, and it wasn't the same love. I didn't have the same love for the job that I had when I joined them. And I wasn't a systems analyst. I couldn't tell you one end of a computer from another, so I didn't have much future there. So I began to think in terms of maybe if we put this together and we get a franchise, then I could switch careers completely and work with the franchise.
So, yeah. So, I mean, this is before we get off this Labor Day exhibition stuff. I mean, yeah, people have to remember too that the Cosmos, especially with Pele in tow from kind of early mid 1975 season onward, would, as part of their business model, right, and rightly so, would do this touring thing at the not only preseason certainly, but definitely afterwards. You know, the Cosmos might have won something or been in the playoffs and stuff, but their season was effectively like maybe only 2/3 over, because then they would go on these extensive world tours, occasionally doing the Johnny Appleseed thing in other markets around North America too, because Pele was, you know, they wanted to maximize their investment and stuff, right? And clearly Pele delivered when he was at this game, right, in September of '76.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They were wonderful ambassadors for the game. And Nesawi and Ahmet Ertegun, who basically ran the club. One of them ran Atlantic Records and the other Pacific Records, but I never figured out which was which. But they were marvelous. But they loved the game of soccer. That was what was so unique about the Cosmos, was that their ownership loved the game. When New England came in and were bought by Lipton Tea, and General Mills came in and bought Minnesota, and Louisiana Pacific came in and bought Portland, they didn't have the same love for the game. And I think Phil Woosnam kind of misinterpreted corporate interest, because he was able to sell them on coming into the league based on the Cosmos success, but they didn't have that love of the sport. Lamar Hunt had it, and the Cosmos had it, but the other corporations that came in didn't have it. And so when things went south in 1981, when we got a recession, clubs fell to the wayside very, very quickly. So it was an interesting time. The Cosmos were absolutely marvelous to work with, and they probably played more times at the Silverdome than any other team other than the Detroit Express. They played 3 exhibitions here in 77, 78, and 79, and then and 3 seasons here. So they must have played at least 6 times in the Silverdome.
So tell me how Woosnam makes the case, and what you and those around you, having seen the success and maybe sort of not thinking about sort of being a franchise owner, walk us through some of the thinking that you had, both positively and skeptically, shall we say?
Well, it was all positive. I mean, Phil Woosnam had such bubbly enthusiasm for it all, and his wonderful Welsh lilting accent, and he seduced everybody he spoke to, our investors and everybody else. And he's a marvelous man. I love Phil Woosnam and miss him dearly, but he was a wonderful pioneer for the sport. But the numbers that we were initially given changed very dramatically. We were initially told it would cost us $625,000 for playing staff for a year, and we could figure on a budget of about $1 million. And we went out and raised about $4 million, and that turned out to be absolute nonsense, because of the money that New York was spending, and Minnesota and Tampa and others were spending. Our costs went through the roof, and we went through that money very, very fast. It was explosive, but I mean, we loved the game of soccer. Part of it was nostalgia. I mean, I'd follow my team, Derby County, as best I could from such a distance, and it's partly a nostalgia thing, but I love the game and love the identity that you have with a team. And we once we got into the idea of putting the Express together, it's been the same as regards the whole sport of soccer in this country. Really, all of us who worked on in the game in the last 40 years have felt like pioneers, and we've shared a companionship and a camaraderie as we're trying to build something. I would never have got involved in soccer if it was an established sport, but it was only because we were building something that made it so much fun and so challenging.
Well, it's also interesting too because you mentioned sort of these corporate owners and stuff, and that is sort of a dynamic that has been part of professional sports in North America for eons, right? I mean, you've got
Yeah.
where and frankly, maybe even at a new level now with private equity, right? These are looked
Hmm.
upon as business slash assets, right? Businesses slash assets,
Yes.
versus what our old friend Paul Gardner would say is sort of the soccer people, right? These
Absolutely.
sometimes, mostly the soccer people, right, are not, and maybe Phil Woosnam and all his magic, right, was maybe imbued with this, right? Not necessarily business first mindset, right, but soccer mindset first, right? And it's very rare, Lamar Hunt being an example, where you have both of those skill sets or the overlap between the passion for the game and the business acumen to figure it out, right, and make it an entity that will be hopefully longer lasting. It really was it's kind of a weird dynamic because as 1978 beckons, right, and the Express become a debut franchise in the league, right, 24 teams, all of seemingly all of a sudden. I think it's an interesting mix of those two dynamics. No.
Yes. Absolutely. We brought in six teams in 1978, and that was an enormous expansion. I mean, it grew by 33% in the 1 year from 18 teams to 24, which was a huge thing to digest. Um,
Did it seem to be the right thing at the time? I mean, did you not, were you blind, if you will, to that? I mean, hindsight is 2020, right? But I mean, clearly the growth and the intrigue for this league was definitely white hot. Was there any thought as you were getting your franchise up and running or was it just kind of like full steam ahead because, this is going to be great?
well, yeah, it was exactly that. I mean, we played two games now in the Silverdome. We played one in 76, the Cosmos and Dallas, and then we played one in 77 with the Cosmos and Santos of Brazil. It was a different Cosmos. Didn't have Pele, but it had Beckenbauer, and it had Canalia, and it had the rest of the gang, Carlos Alberto, and so on. And we drew more for the non-Pele year in 1977 than we did in 1976. We drew about close to 25,000 in 1976 and more expensive tickets. And it really looked very, very healthy. And then we had another big plus for us here, originally a plus, in the end a huge negative, that we had put together a nucleus of investors, putting in $100,000 each, various types of background restaurateurs and business people. And then I got a call from Phil Woosnam, and he said, "Well, I've had a call from Jimmy Hill, who you may know of, but Jimmy Hill was a soccer icon in Great Britain. He played for Fulham. He'd managed Coventry City. He was on the board of Coventry City. He'd run the union in Britain that got rid of the maximum wage of £20 a week. He was a god. He was a television icon. He had Match of the Day every Saturday night on BBC television, one of the biggest television programs. And he was absolutely huge. And he had said to Phil, I want to invest in soccer in the United States. He had been running programs in Saudi Arabia for the Saudi government. And under the British tax laws at that time, if he'd repatriated the profits, he'd have to pay 90% taxes. But if he invested them somewhere else, he could avoid that. So that was what he was trying to do. And he thought there was an honest motive there. He did think that soccer in the United States had a huge future. And so Phil Woosnam said, well, go to San Diego, go to Minneapolis, go to a couple of other cities. And he said, and then you go to Detroit and talk to Roger Faulkner. And when you've done that, you'll decide you want to invest in Detroit. So lo and behold, Jimmy Hill's emissary, a guy named John Campkin, came over, and we met. And John Campkin and Jimmy decided Detroit was where they wanted to put their dollars. And so John Campkin and I were still at Burroughs, but we worked day and night on putting the investment package together and planning out a future for the Detroit Express.
So you're working by day for the man, and by night you're essentially launching a North American
Yes.
Soccer League franchise
Yeah.
with perhaps some new investment. So, yeah, I mean, sir, Jimmy Hill, clearly, I mean, his name, his legacy, and the
Yeah.
contributions to the game, and commentary and all that stuff, very legendary, sort of in England and Great Britain. What kind of money though was Jimmy bringing into the mix? I mean, he strikes me as being, or struck me as being, more of a front guy, so to speak, than maybe a dollars guy.
Well, he wasn't the best businessman, and he didn't quite understand the difference between marketing soccer in the United States and marketing soccer in England. You don't have to tell soccer fans in England that Coventry City are going to play at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. Everybody knows that. In the United States, it's a little different. You have to tell people when you play in the games, and you have to give them extra reasons to come to the games. You've got to promote. You've got to have a little dazzle. You've got to put something on a little bit beyond just 90 minutes of soccer. But Jimmy probably put in a couple of million, at least a couple of $1 million over the entire period that he was involved with the club. But he manipulated things in a way that I didn't recognize. I was naive. I wasn't very old, 39 or something. And he manipulated things, first of all, by Gordon Preston and I had formed a corporation, Faulkner Preston, and we were general partners, and Jimmy Hill and his World Sports Academy general partners. He then, after in the middle of the second year, said, "We're going to have to get rid of Gordon Preston." And I said, "I can't do that. He's the man who got me into the game. He's my closest friend." And he was rough at the edges in many respects. There are dozens of stories in the book about Gordon and
Which is a hoot,
incident.
by the way, and we're going to promote the heck out of it. Don't you worry. But anybody who is with us in this conversation so far needs to get this book because it's wondrous. But I digress.
So he said, "Well, I'm not going to put any more money into the club unless you fire Gordon Preston." And I probably could have dug my heels in at that point, but I think if we had, the club would have gone into the dust almost immediately. But so we negotiated a package with Gordon, and he left. And so now there was just basically Jimmy Hill's organization and mine. But then we needed more money. I look at the minutes of the directors' meeting every month when we met, and the first agenda item of every meeting was recapitalization, finding new money, because we had ripped through our initial investment capital very, very fast. We didn't have 4 million initially, but we got to 4 million probably in the second year. But we were going through it very, very quickly. And so we found two people, a guy called Sonny Van Arnhem, who owned a subsequent incarnation of the Detroit Express, but that's another story. Sonny Van Arnhem and Gary Lemon, and they came in, and at the last minute, they were putting in $250,000 each. But at the last minute, they said, "Well, we'd like to be general partners." And I talked to Jimmy about this, and I thought, well, we'll have three general partners in the US, me and Gary Lemon and Sonny Van Arnhem, and Jimmy in the UK. So that should be manageable. But lo and behold, at the start of the third season, I'd gone down to Lakeland, which is where the Tigers do spring training, was where the Express were doing spring training. We got a lot of media out of it because the press were there. And I was down there. I got a call from Detroit to say that Jimmy Hill's son was in town. he was holding meetings with the limited partners without my presence, and he was going to put in another $1 million if the limited partners would vote me out. So it was a complete maneuvering on his part, which is described in the book, to use his financial leverage. In the end, the golden rule is that the gold rules, and he managed to get the limited partners to vote me out. Although some of them subsequently called me and said it was the worst thing they ever did. And the week after I had been let go, the third general partner, Sonny Van Arnhem, was also squeezed out. Jimmy Hill and Gary Lemon. Now there are three general partners. So Jimmy Hill and Gary Lemon vote out Sonny Van Arnhem, the third general partner. So now they completely control the ship. Sonny went to the newspapers and said it was the worst thing that could have happened, and if I'm going to try to get the franchise back, and I'll rehire Roger Faulkner. It was a terrible mistake, and but it didn't happen. And then lo and behold, we get to about 6 weeks before the season in 1980. We get to 6 weeks before the season, and Jimmy Hill decides to move the franchise to Washington. We had 5,000, 6,000 season ticket holders. We had television contracts with strong media stations in Detroit. We were doing all of our games on WJR, which is a 50,000 watt station, huge area of listeners. We had terrific contracts. We had marketing contracts. And Jimmy Upton moved the team to Washington because he believed there were all these foreign people who lived in Washington, working at the embassies and so on in the international aspect of Washington, and that they would be big soccer fans. He looked at their attendance, and Sonny Werblin of Madison Square Gardens, who had owned the Washington franchise, had lost an enormous amount of money in the previous 6 years, 5 or 6 years. And although their attendance was shown as 19,000, they papered the house. So at the end of that year of Jimmy Hill operating in Washington, their attendance was 20% less than we had in Detroit. And they left town overnight. Ken Furphy, who was the head coach of the Express, said he went into the office on a Monday morning and the doors were locked. And he made calls, and he found out that Duncan Hill, who was the general manager, had gone. He'd gone back to England, and that was it. They'd fled the coop, resigned from the league, and gone. So it was a very sad end to the partnership with Jimmy Hill.
What's the motivation there? Because we have to always put this in context, right? This is 3 years of 78 launching the franchise, the first year of the franchise, 79 and 1980. In many respects, I think a lot of people would look at those as sort of the most go-go of go-go years, if you will, for this league,
Yeah.
right? National television with ABC in 1979 and,
Sure.
kind of crossing some real benchmarks.
Yeah.
What was his mindset?
It was getting established. It was getting established, and Phil Woosnam regarded us as one of the most successful franchises in the country. I mean, he told me that time and again. And our attendance was well up there. We were the best attended of the 6 expansion teams, and it was just a mistake to move it to Washington. But Jimmy had got this bee in his bonnet. It was also a shorter flight from England to Washington than to Detroit. Saved him a couple of hours. Although he spent very little time in the United States. That was another weakness. I don't think he was here more than 2 weeks in the entire 3 years.
Well, all right, but so tell us though, you're Mr. More than behind the scenes, right? I mean, you were really instrumental in kind of much of the nuts and bolts of getting this franchise up and run. Yeah. Maybe a little bit of insight for our audience to tease them to get the book for the details, the gory details, about how you went about building the team that you needed in 1978. And it's interesting because it does seem to sort of play into kind of a dynamic that a lot of teams kind of wanted to do at the time, which was at least do a mini version of the Cosmos to get at least a key player that maybe has some international credibility and maybe build around them?
And we did that, absolutely. We, I wouldn't take credit for it because it was Jimmy Hill in his relationships in England brought Trevor Francis to us. And Trevor Francis was our Pele. Trevor Francis was one of the best soccer players I've ever seen. He actually flew in for an exhibition, you're probably aware of this, in 1979, pre-season. He flew in for an exhibition against the New York Cosmos at the Silverdome on March 19th, I think it was, of 1979. The Express won 8-2, and Trevor Francis scored 6 goals. And when he took the ball from the center circle after the New York Cosmos had got a goal and he restarted, he took the ball passed to him from the center circle, went entirely through the Cosmos defense. And the last words he heard were "shoot, Trevor, shoot" from Beckenbauer, because he was so in awe of how well Trevor had played. And he got 6 goals that day. It was fantastic. So he turned the franchise around here. We were drawing 10, 12,000 a game prior to Trevor coming in the first year, gradually went up into the 20,000s, and we had our best crowd of 33,000. But Trevor was the spark that did that. But we had some other good players. We had Alan Brazil, and who plays for Scotland, and some other very good players. We had a good team. It was an English-based team because we felt that they could communicate and do a community outreach program because of their ability to communicate with Americans. And so we used it. It was basically an English team with mostly owned, some loan players, and then the required minimum of Americans and Canadians. Our first player was actually from the Cosmos, Paul Hunter, who was a fullback that we signed from the Cosmos. But the essence of the team was English.
Now, Francis, though, this is a unique hook for a lot of franchises, at least as a short-term thing. He never really he was always on loan, Francis, right?
Yes. Okay. Oh, absolutely.
Which was the loophole that I think enticed a lot of, and maybe people like Jimmy Hill. That's how maybe describe in England what people were thinking or knowing about this NASL thing, because people we've talked to who were there at the time kind of describe kind of a more dour, kind of cynical and lifeless kind of game at that time. And they heard, at least magically or otherwise, this NASL thing was sort of this bright ray of sunshine and multicolored at that. And we should take advantage of that and maybe go for a while and see what this is like. Is that kind of the dynamic that maybe
Yeah, I think so. I think so. At that time, it was regarded as a very nice retirement home for former Football League players to spend the last 2 or 3 years of their careers. But Trevor changed that dynamic because he was only, I don't know, 23, 24 years old when he came over. He was not at the height of his career at that point in time. He had several World Cups ahead of him. And so to have him at the height or close to the height of his skills was a huge coup. But we paid him in those days a lot of money for a limited number of games. I mean, extraordinary amount of money, really, for playing only 15 games, I think, the first year and maybe less the second year.
He even switched teams, right? He was with Birmingham City, and then he went to Nottingham, like literally in the NASL, quote unquote, off season, right?
That's exactly right. I was in Chastleton at Jimmy Hill's house when in the Cotswolds in England when he was on the phone with Brian Clough, and they were talking about Trevor Francis and whether he should go to Nottingham Forest or not, and trying to work out a deal where we would continue to get Trevor on loan. And Jimmy Hill, to his credit, said Brian Clough wanted to pay £950,000 for Trevor Francis, and Jimmy Hill said, "No, you got to pay £1 million. It's got to be the first £1 million player ever in Britain," which he ultimately did become. Moved to Forest, and then the agreement to loan him to the US fell through for one reason or another, and he didn't come back for that third year. but yeah, he moved to Notts Forest.
Tell me about sort of those years though with the Express. What was your approach to marketing in the local marketplace? Obviously, the Silverdome was bright and shiny and new, but it was still, really at the outskirts of metropolitan Detroit, maybe for better or for worse, right? Um,
Yeah,
what was that dynamic like? How are you selling? How are you pitching? How are you appealing to fans? I mean, the fact that you had all those media deals, including the radio at that time, that was pretty avant-garde.
yeah, it was good. We had our focus was on the family and on the young players in the Michigan Youth Association and AYSO and so on. We had tremendous relationships with the leagues, with the associations, with the colleges too, Oakland University and others that were developing soccer programs. And we put money back into it. One of our investors was a guy named John Maxwell who had a chain of Bonanza restaurants. And in our conversations with him, he talked about he wanted to put money in to sponsor the club. And we said, no, we want you to start a travel league for Michigan kids. So an upgraded level of youth competition. So our relationships with the youth community were tremendous, and that helped us get attendance. And we did an enormous number of PR appearances and speaking appearances. It was staggering how many we did. I mean, I remember one time I was going to speak in Troy at a management center, and as I walked towards the stage, Mrs. Furphy, Ken Furphy, the head coach's wife, said to me, "I hope this isn't going to be the speech we heard you give yesterday, Roger." And it was. It was totally unsettling because I had an idea of what I was going to say, but we were speaking every day in morning meetings at Elks clubs and Rotary clubs and so on, and chambers of commerce, and we were out beating the bushes. So we worked very hard at it and built a community program and invested in youth soccer and not so much adult soccer. There wasn't very little at that time, but we did our best.
So, but it's also more of I must say, grassroots kind of thing, right? Whereas what you were
Yes.
clearly in hindsight, right? You're doing most of the dirty work, so to speak, right? Versus say some others, maybe Mr. Hill in particular, kind of pizzazz and star and is trying to come out
Mm-hmm.
to the game but as in order to make something last longer term, right? You want people to keep coming back, have a good experience, make it family friendly, affordability, all those kinds of things, right? Plus the quality of the play
Yeah.
on the field.
Yes, and we did different promotions, individual games, and certain games certain leagues would be featured. We did one semi-disastrous promotion that Gordon came up with. He was going to have an international day very early on. We were playing Toronto's Metro Croatia, which was the last of the ethnic named experiments in the NASL with the Croatia name. And Gordon arranged for all these representatives of all these various countries to march before the game with their flags, which they did around the Silverdome floor. And then I'm not quite. This was during the pre-years to the Bosnian and Baltic and the wars on the Balkan Peninsula. And I'm not quite sure what happened, whether it was the Serbs or they were suddenly all at each other, tearing each other's flags down on the field, which was a rather bizarre situation for us to be in. But we reached out to the ethnic communities. You had to. They were a base of support, and there were ethnic leagues, but they were very narrow in their viewpoints of who they would support. And I remember we did one promotion. We did separately. We did a game between Lazio of Rome and Eintracht of Braunschweig from Germany. And I went to my Italian barber a week after the game, and I said, "Did you go to the game?" And he said, "No, no, no." I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, I'm from Milano. Why would I go to see a team from Roma?" And so you could appeal to the ethnic communities, but they were very narrow in what they expected in return.
Yeah, and there's a level of sophistication there to know that the various regions of Italy have much more,
yeah,
passion for their various teams and their local
yes,
clubs, right? You can't
absolutely.
just have a quote unquote
Absolutely,
Italian
but a
team.
lot of them aren't soccer supporters. They're Milan supporters, or they're Inter supporters, or you know, they support their team. I'm a Derby County supporter. The only reason I have Notts Forest on the television right now, who are 2-0 up at Tottenham, I'm sad to see, is because I hate Nottingham Forest, and because of the Brian Clough years. But they they didn't turn out to support the NASL in those early days in the way people had thought they would.
Well, it's the Euro snobbery thing, which, by the way, hasn't kind of really gone away, and maybe exacerbated by the fact that now we've got so much soccer available from all the corners of the world and stuff. And sadly, MLS is held against
Yes.
that comparison, and rightly or wrongly. But I guess that's part of how the marketing and how you get people to, like, do you market it as spectacle? Do you market it as soccer? Do you market it as the international game? I mean, the answer, of course, to all those is yes, but
Yeah.
the challenge is how do you mix that together successfully, and that's not always, certainly wasn't always uniformly applied in the NASL in the late 70s.
Yeah. I think that's right. Uh, when I did my second soccer venture, I became president of the Michigan Soccer Association, and then in 1989, when I was president, I created a Detroit World Cup bid to stage games at the Silverdome. And that was a different dynamic altogether. By that time, we were able to market the game to Americans. My pitch for World Cup was you don't have to care about soccer to care about World Cup, care about Michigan, because it's going to do so much for our image, for business, I mean, Detroit has a very poor image in overseas. It changed. And we got a lot of benefit from having those World Cup games, but we were able to attract an American audience. We had a good ethnic base who turned out because it was World Cup, but Americans came to the games by and large, and so it was a totally different dynamic than it was in the NASL days.
What did you do when Hill and friends essentially absconded with the team to the new Washington Diplomats? There was this Detroit Express ASL franchise that was that kind of filled the vacuum for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Were you part of that, or were you just disheartened by the experience?
I was disheartened, but I did broadcast some of their games for them. It was in the ASL. They won the ASL championship one year with a 30,000 crowd to see it, but it was absolute papered the house, and the quality wasn't quite the same. But it was dying. The Sonny Van Arnhem, who claimed he was the commissioner for the last couple of months of the existence of the league, but tried to save it, but couldn't. And I was not involved in the ASL. They eventually moved from the Silverdome and went downtown to Wayne State University to play. And I did not go down there to those games, but maybe one or two, but I was not involved.
Tell me though, tell me what you're doing then, sort of post that sort of high, if you will, and that adventure, and then getting to the beginnings of a World Cup venue bid. The 1980s, we've talked about this ad nauseum on the show. People are probably sick of me hearing this, but I, having grown up as a Cosmos fan, the NASL and stuff, I mean, the word abandonment comes up, right? And the fandom that I got hooked on, right? There was, I mean, with a couple of exceptions here and there was literally a vacuum. There was nothing. I mean, it was just, it was almost
was indoor. There was
the
MISL was the indoor league was virtually
right, which
the
was
only.
fun, but not the same, right?
No, it wasn't the same. I did a lot of television broadcasts of the Detroit Lightning and the Detroit teams games, and but it was not the same. And be recapping the goals at the end of the game, and there'd be 25 goals, and it was awful. It was not the same skills that we saw it wasn't the same art form that you see in soccer at its height, at its best.
So you
But
didn't make that. You
I
didn't
was
make.
with Merrill Lynch. I joined Merrill Lynch as an investment broker. I figured if I can persuade people to invest in something as nebulous as a soccer franchise, I'd be terrific at actually getting them to invest in something really meaningful. And so I joined Merrill Lynch and was with them for 28 years, but stayed enormously involved in soccer throughout that period, as both through the World Cup, which there are many, many stories there in the book, but uh, I also did a tennis tournament in '83 with Lamar Hunt. We did the World Championship tennis finals in Detroit with Yvonne Lendl and Vilas and the 8 best players of the WC Tour, which Lamar owned. So we did that. But then after World Cup, I was heavily involved with the foundation, the US Soccer Foundation. I was a founding director of that for the first couple of years, and then I served on the investment committee for 25 years. So I stayed pretty active in soccer one way and another.
Well, and arguably you're, one of those builders, if you will, as if you look at the U.S. Soccer Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
wink, wink, hint, hint. Builders really important, and it only it, it required a whole sort of passion and interest and persistence, right? I mean, you're describing a love affair with the game that flirts with you in terms of how you live your life, your profession, or not, or is it a super passion, the night and weekend job? There's something about it, right, that keeps, if you will, and specifically in your case, right, drawing you back, right, for
Yeah,
again, literally for
it's an
better or for
unusual
worse.
sport too. It's an unusual sport because it's a team sport. And when my kids were playing, and if I hadn't been at the game and they came home, I said, "How did you do?" They didn't say, "Oh, I scored 2 goals," or "I made 4 tackles," or "I made 3 saves." They said, "We lost 2-1," or "We won 3-0." It was the team concept came first, and that's one of the things I've always loved about the game. That it's not I gained 300 yards or made 6 tackles or whatever. It's a team sport, and they would rather not score and win than score 2 goals and lose. And that character building element of the sport, I think, has been so important. And we we took our World Cup profits of 400,000 that we had left over at the end of World Cup here in Detroit, and we put that into a Michigan foundation, and we created the Detroit City League, which now has over 2,000 players. And the point isn't to create the next Messi or Ronaldo, which would be wonderful, but the point is to create good citizens, people getting them off the street and occupying themselves in something really healthy. And I'm probably as proud of the numbers, which I do write about in the book a little bit. But I'm as proud of the numbers of people that we introduced to the sport and we got involved in something worthwhile, as I am the other things with the Express and World Cup, because I think we made a lot of difference to a lot of lives in Michigan.
All right, couple of odds and ends I want to clarify here before we let you go to your real life here. So number one, on the lead up to the World Cup stuff. So how do you get involved? Does somebody come tap you on the shoulder in the late '80s and say, "Hey, there's a bid going on for the World Cup, and you should step up and do Detroit"? Was that you maybe initiating?
No. I think it was July 4th of 1988 that FIFA announced that they were giving the World Cup to the United States, and which of course raised hackles all around the world of people who thought it was insane. But as president of the
Especially given what
Michigan
we just
Soccer
talked about.
Association,
Yeah,
hmm?
right. Especially what we just talked about, the death of the NASL and all that stuff.
Yeah, sure. But as president of the Michigan Soccer Association, I immediately got in touch with the World Cup organization and said I would like to put together a bid in Detroit. And initially, we were thinking in terms of the Ann Arbor Stadium, University of Michigan. but they year and a half, and eventually we decided on the Silverdome. But the the essence of it was to get Detroit involved and get involved right at the outset, so that we went to the 1990 World Cup in Italy to show our enthusiasm for it all. And it was a long building process, but we were able to build a lot of corporate interest, and we got the support of the governor, John Engler, at that time, and Ford and Chrysler and GM and others all came in as supporters. So we raised a lot of money. We raised another 4 million, 5 million to do grass inside the Silverdome when it finally transpired that that was the only direction we could go.
It sounds like you had to do a lot of arm twisting for that. And I was at that first game, the U.S. Switzerland game, and I remember the humidity, and there are stories, maybe apocryphal or not, about Bora Milutinovic maybe playing around with the air conditioning or the air systems in there and all that kind of stuff to make it more of a hot house.
Didn't have any air conditioning. I think
That's
Tom
right.
King, who was very instrumental, he was on my board of the bid committee and initially the host committee, and then of course became a very senior official eventually at World Cup in Los Angeles and at the United States Soccer Federation. But Tom King at the Convention and Visitors Bureau wrote our bid book. And in the bid book, he said that the Silverdome average temperature year round is 72, which it probably is because it's 30 in the winter and 100 in the summer.
It's not lying. Yeah, right.
He had left it in there. The average temperature year round was 72. Because it's an air supported roof, you can't extract the air. You can't cool it down. There was no way of cooling it down. And the famous remark from Roy Hodgson, the Swiss manager, who was a delightful man, but he said afterwards it was like playing in a hot dog stand with the temperature and the ambience. That was his description of it. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was hot. It was hot.
But it also had to be something to convince FIFA that, while you couldn't convince them on the turf issue, playing indoors, did that kind of exclude you in the beginning, or did you have all the answers?
Yes, it did. It did. In fact, I had, even though we'd switched our emphasis from the University of Michigan to Pontiac Silverdome, and FIFA had announced at World Cup 1990 at the press conference I was at that they would consider indoor stadiums for 1994. I didn't think it was a very real possibility. But I was at a Region 2 meeting of the United States Soccer Federation in Cleveland in March of 1992, and Steve Sampson was there, and Steve said, "Are you putting in a bid?" And I said, "I don't think so. You'd have to come up with a huge deposit and all the other ramifications." And I said, "I don't think we're going to put a bid in." He said, "I think you should." He said, "This is so unique. And Alan Rothenberg wants us to place a stamp on World Cup that nobody's ever done before. And we think an indoor stadium with natural grass would put the US mark on the World Cup." And so this was March, and we went home and I raised 87,000 cash to write a check as a deposit, and the bid went through. And then we staged a game between England and Germany in 1 year out from World Cup in 1993.
This was U.S. Cup, I think it was.
U.S. Cup, yeah, exactly. I always remember sitting in my little office here in Bloomfield Hills with Sunil Gulati on the other end of the line saying, "Well, what do you want? Do you want U.S. Brazil or do you want England Germany?" And I said, "I think I want England Germany." We'd had the U.S. play here a year before, and so I said, "We'll have England Germany." They'd only played 21 times in their entire history, which I found amazing. And so we did England-Germany and had 63,000 for that. Biggest financial gate ever in US history at that point. And it was very successful. The indoor grass was brought in from California and placed into the Silverdome in 1,994 hexagonal trays and locked together on the Silverdome floor. And the England-Germany game went ahead and was very, very successful. And FIFA were absolutely thrilled at that point. Absolutely thrilled that the experiment worked. And the same grass was taken out and brought back again for 1994.
Yeah, I was at that first game, and when the U.S. scored, I think I probably punctured the roof how high I jumped when we tied up the game against Switzerland, because it wasn't U.S. national team wasn't necessarily a commodity that could be trusted, right? Because nobody kind of really knew it was going to happen.
No, absolutely. 2 days before the game, Alan Rothenberg had called me and he said, we're a bit worried about the atmosphere in the Silverdome. We don't know whether the crowd will. There'll be a lot of corporate tickets. There'll be a lot of people who've never seen a soccer game before who will go in there because their corporation bought 40 tickets and they feel obligated to go. And he said, what if we don't get any atmosphere? He said, would you go out and you buy a flag for every seat? 70,000 flags, little flags to put on every seat. And we had our volunteers put flags on every seat for the 2 nights before the game, that USA-Switzerland game. Well, when the teams were introduced, or not the teams, but the countries were introduced, 24 countries introduced in alphabetical order with their flags before the game in the opening ceremonies. And of course, the United States came last as the 24th team alphabetically. And the roar when the United States was announced was so incredible. Alan Rothenberg turned to me and said, well, you wasted a lot of money on those bloody flags, Roger, didn't you? and when they did score, and when Ronaldo scored his free kick, as you say, the roof came off the Silverdome. The enthusiasm was tremendous, and it satisfied every hope that we had had up to that point.
All right, one more look back question, and then we'll end with your crystal ball, shall we say? I'm really curious during this World Cup experience and the success that you had with the tournament in the Silverdome and the games and the halo of that. How aware and or interested were you and or the people around you about this FIFA mandated pro league that had to be in place in the aftermath of the cup? Obviously, it took 2 years to get going. Yeah. Rothenberg was part of that, of course. And maybe where, why, and how is Detroit, aside from the USL experience of the downtown team, and I know USL has been kind of a very grassroots thing, and that's a whole other sort of part of it, but it's been a journey, and I think some people would have expected Detroit to have had a franchise at some point along the way in MLS's journey.
No question.
And I know you've been part of some of those.
No question. I was involved. We had an MLS bid here. When MLS was trying to get approval from the United States Soccer Federation to be a Division I league, there was competition from a guy in Chicago and others who wanted Division I status. And I went with Mark Abbott, and we lobbied in Atlanta and San Francisco and Oakland, lobbying directors of the USSF to vote for MLS. So I was involved a little bit in that inception, and we did put in a bid, but we didn't have a stadium. The idea of an indoor stadium was not very well looked on at that point, and because we didn't have a suitable stadium, a suitable size, you really need the 30,000 seat stadium, ideally, not to, good seats available, I think is the name of your program. And if we'd gone with the Silverdome or the big house in Ann Arbor for an MLS franchise, we sure as hell would have had a lot of good seats available. So if we'd have had the stadium, we could have got the investors. And if we'd had the investors, we could have built a stadium, but we never were in a situation where we had both, and where we were in a position to get a team. In 2016, Don Garber came to town, and we had a meeting with the representatives of Tom Gores, who owned the Pistons, and the Fords, who owned the NFL team, and other people. And an announcement was almost made that they were going to build a stadium on the old jail site in Detroit, and that was going to be the home of a new Detroit MLS franchise. And I was jumping through hoops at that point of delight that I thought it was going to happen. And somehow the real estate aspect of it, Dan Gilbert, who is a builder in Detroit and has done a tremendous amount of renovation of the city of Detroit, Dan Gilbert kind of lost his appetite for it. He was part of the Gorish group, and he said, "Well, we're not going to use the jail site. We'll use that for something else, and we'll go to Ford Field and adapt Ford Field." And that just didn't seem on to me. You don't have the right drainage inside. They wanted us to use grass inside and in Ford Field, and there were way too many complications in doing that. And so gradually the idea fell away. And it was afterwards only just courtesy calls we got from MLS, and maintaining a very low level interest in there being a team. So it's a great shame, because this is a huge soccer market.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to debate the market and its attractiveness, especially with a renewed verve downtown, but also certainly a thriving suburbs that have been for generations. All right, so here's some of the crystal ball things, and then I'll try to keep them compact and allow you to regain your sanity after this conversation. So let's talk about Detroit and its current pro world, right? It's in the USL Championship, which is the quote unquote de facto Division II, if you will, of the United States. But as we know, right, there is the vision now for USL to create its own Division I league. Obviously controversial. MLS not necessarily happy about that per se. But Detroit City FC, right, has been quite a journey for the last 10 years or so, from these hodgepodge of leagues into a legit pro team now, with an urban core stadium that has been renovated, all that stuff, right?
Quite extraordinary.
Hopeful and new? Yeah.
Started at a high school, and with 3,000 people in 2012, and then moved to Kiewa Stadium, where my soccer career began, with Hertha of Berlin and Coventry City. They moved to Kiewa Stadium in Hamtramck, which is a 7,500 seat stadium. And now they are building, I think it's probably about 15,000 seat stadium on an old hospital site, which they demolished in downtown, in the center of downtown in Detroit. And that will open in 2027. And that's a remarkable story. But how they make the transition from where they are now, paying players, I don't know, 5,000 a month, maybe 6,000 a month at most, and they do clinics and other things and get other income from those sources. But how do you move from that to be competing with MLS in terms of costs? Building from the ground up has never worked in the United States. The idea of that you could build a soccer franchise starting like Manchester United did, a small heath at one time, it hasn't evolved. We've never been able to evolve from grassroots level to major league level, and how 20 odd clubs within the USL structure can evolve to being Division I teams, I don't know. I think you're still going to have a white knight, a huge billionaire, millionaire type investor, if you're going to attract the type of talent that plays in the English Premier League. So it's going to be a tough ask. I think Detroit, because of its unique community relations and its unique image, is capable of doing it. but I'm not sure that it's going to happen in Hartford and Indianapolis and El Paso.
Well, I guess the embedded question there too also is, I mean, number one, could you have ever imagined just the fact that we were having this conversation, right? I mean, the fact that there are not only is a almost 30-year-old Major League Soccer team, but a pyramid, if you will, artificially constructed at this point, really, but of minor league or lower league teams in this country, right? That kind of, the economics may still not be there, but the passion, the verve, the ability to grow a grassroots team, right, is
absolutely
there.
huge. It's absolutely huge. But how it will adapt, I don't know. Going forward, it's going to be very challenging for USL to make that transition to. Well, I like the idea of promotion and agree to that. You can't get somebody to spend $5 billion on putting together a stadium and an organization, and then tell them that, well, if you don't win enough games, you won't even be in the league next year. That doesn't work. So MLS can't be part of that pyramid any more than the pyramid works in the NFL or the basketball or baseball associations. Can't work. They're structured so totally differently.
Too much risk for a potential investor.
Yes,
All right,
way too much risk.
The penultimate question then is your thoughts on MLS, right? It's still a closed league. It's still a centrally controlled and it's owner operator based. They still haven't made that full move to franchise ownership and that kind of stuff. But obviously some shifting going on, right? A change in the schedule to be more aligned with the European schedule, all that kind of stuff. It's still around. There are soccer specific stadiums. Yet there's still people who take pot shots at it, right? Is it truly major league? Is it quality against the world's best leagues and stuff, et cetera? Where's your head on that? Even though you don't have a Detroit franchise to brag
all
about.
the way back when 30 odd years ago, when I was working with Mark Abbott and lesser extent to Neil and so on, and they were putting the structure of MLS together, I had to bite my lips very hard to the idea of a single entity structure. But then when we were supposed to go to the USSF and make a presentation for MLS to get approval as a Division One league, and I was supposed to make a presentation, and I was going to do comparisons with leagues overseas, that saying that, if you're a Dundee United supporter, you don't wake up at the start of the season and say this could be our year, because it won't be. It'll be Rangers or Celtic. And you don't wake up in Spain as a Real Valladolid supporter and say this could be our year. And it won't be, because Real Madrid and Barcelona will win everything, or maybe Deportivo Corona. And I was going to make that pitch that there is nothing competitive about the way soccer is structured in the rest of the world. In almost every league, there are one or two clubs, Bayern Munich and Dortmund in Germany, that will dominate because of the uncontrolled expenditure and the size of the markets. And so I went along with the single entity structure as being the only way that you could avoid that. But I still have terribly mixed feelings about it, because I like dynasties. I like a New York Yankees. I like having teams that you want to have a chance to beat, but who are great teams. But it's a difficult problem to solve, because money talks, and the Chelseas and Manchester Cities will continue to outspend everybody else. And when you support a team, as I do, like Derby County, and you realize how impossible it is that we'll ever get back to winning a Premier League, it tests your loyalty, but it doesn't change it.
Are you surprised, though, that that stability has not led to, after three decades now, unshackling from a central controlled and operated thing to a franchise model at this point?
Yes, I probably am surprised. I thought it would have evolved more to that direction, less revenue sharing and more independence. Um, but it seems to be working. Seems to be working. 70,000 people turn out to see Messi every time he sets a foot on the field.
Until he
So it is.
retires, and then what do we do next, right? So yeah, okay, we go. There's negatives to that too, right? How many more Pelés and Messis are we gonna,
There'll be somebody. There'll be somebody come along. There'll be somebody come along. I won't be here to see it, but somebody will
come on,
come along.
don't be so negative. All right, here's the last question, and thank you for the tolerance. I have to ask you about your feelings now and in the coming weeks about this World Cup, quote unquote, extravaganza. I'm pretty famous for my commentary, my negative associations of all. I mean, the affordability thing and the
I'm totally ambivalent about
immigration.
it. I
You're
think it's.
ambivalent. Okay, go tell me why.
I think it's been destroyed by the money that is in the game these days, by the ambitions of FIFA, by the political aspirations of Infantino, um, and who knows what's going to happen with Iran, and we've even got Jordan and other countries coming to the World Cup. Who knows what's going to happen? It's lost. FIFA used to be apolitical. The terms of their structure, rather, they don't get involved with politics. They stay out of it. That's changed. The money is just obscene. The idea of using a floating ticket price, the dynamic pricing, which is just another word for charging the most we can get, uh, undermines the whole culture of soccer, to my mind. So I'm not as enthusiastic. I won't be going to. I won't be going to any World Cup games. I don't think. It's a better game. It's a better event on television anyway. I've been to lots of World Cups. I'm starting with Italy and then France and of course the United States and then Germany, and I've been to lots of World Cups. But you only see one game every 2 or 3 days, and half the other games on television you miss because you were traveling or you were somewhere else. So sitting at home in front of my television watching 104 games is probably much more satisfactory to me.
Do you think it could negatively impact the growth of the game here in the States or North America, or do you think it's all upward, or is it truly a question mark?
I just hope to see it. I hope to see 104 games staged peacefully, without political protests, without terrorist intervention, without ICE threatening potentially illegal immigrants or trying to identify illegal immigrants. I just see so many things potentially impacting the World Cup that has always been, to me, my mind, a pure event. It's all the politics and the money has not been a consideration in the past. Been a wonderful event when I was in Italy and France and everywhere else. Marvelous event. I was at the US-Iran game in Lyon. The Iranians were wonderful people. The differences were not no significance. Political differences and racial differences and ethnic differences were of no significance. It was a harmonious event, and whether we will have that, I don't know. And that's in certain places because I haven't got the funding, and it's lost something. It's lost something this year. It's going to be a very different World Cup than the 1994 World Cup. So I don't know whether I'm echoing what your thoughts are, but I have apprehensions, put it that way.
Well, I don't want to leave on a negative note. I mean, I do hope, we did discuss so much, right? I mean, all the stuff that you've done in your career around this sport, right? All the seeds sown and the all the contributions and the grassroots levels and all the other things, right? If, you would hope that even if things do go sideways on some levels, that there at least is some, I don't know, level of infrastructure and growth that is now entrenched, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
allows for things to continue to go on and hopefully grow despite that, maybe where a few decades ago that didn't exist, right? And would be more consequential.
Absolutely. And you do need money to make things happen, as well as passion and volunteers. And the money, I don't know, I forget what the numbers are, but maybe 200 million that the USSF is likely to finish up with at the end of this whole exercise. I mean, there's a lot of money going to be available to help build the next major move in soccer, and build out that infrastructure and build out the coaching programs and so on. I think that the World Cup will have a very positive effect in that regard.
All right, massive, massive thanks to Roger for that amazing set of stories, and so much more that I'd love to ask him on another date, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do so. But you do, if you were intrigued with this conversation as much as I was, you owe it to yourself to get yourself a copy of this book sooner rather than later. It's called You Can't Get There From Here, My Soccer Journey from Derby to Detroit. And it is published by our friends at Kohler Books, and it's available now, as they say, wherever fine books are found. And of course, if you'd like to help support this show in the most nominal way possible, you can, by all means, click on one of the links that we've got in the show description to get the book, or on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, listed under episode number 441, myself and Mr. Faulkner. And those links will conveniently whisk you to our friends at Amazon, who will compensate us with a literal few shekels of referral love when you purchase the book in, hardcover or paperback or even Kindle versions. We thank you for considering a purchase in that way. You by no means have to do it that way. Just get yourself the book, for goodness sakes. It's well worth the time and the read. You can follow Roger in the social realm on X exclusively. His handle is at Roger Faulkner 94. Yeah, I'll spell it for you. Roger is Roger. Faulkner is Faulkner, and then the number 94. So it's at Roger Faulkner 94 on the X/Twitter thing. Now, like I said before, we've got two copies of You Can't Get There From Here, this great book by Roger, for you to win for successfully answering our trivia question this week. And here it is. We know the Detroit Express that Roger was instrumental in bringing into life, played 3 seasons in the NASL outdoors, technically indoors because they were playing in the Silverdome, right? But they also played 2 seasons of NASL indoor soccer as well. The 1979-80 season and the 1980-81 season, after which they finished, they bolted for Washington to become the second iteration of the Diplomats. Now, the question is this. We know that the MISL played in 79-80 for 1 season in Detroit as well. That was the Detroit Lightning, and they played their games at Coball Hall. Where did the Express play in 79-80 as well as 80-81, their 2 seasons of indoor NASL soccer? Where did they play their indoor games? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't at Coball Hall in downtown Detroit. If you can be one of the first 2 correct answers to our email address at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com with that correct answer, you will win yourself a copy of Roger's awesome book, You Can't Get There From Here. And we know when they come in because we timestamp them and stuff. So, and please, if you've won a book within the last kind of 6 months or so, if you wouldn't mind stepping aside and letting some other folks perhaps win themselves a copy. I want to try to keep it as egalitarian and as open as possible for as many people to enjoy winning this contest. Thanks for entering in advance, and maybe just put in the subject matter there that you're entering the trivia contest for this week. That's also our email address for other general correspondence. It's again hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com, and you can find us on various socials too. You'll find us on the X Twitter thing at Good Seats Still. You will find us on Blue Sky, where we're probably most active. There we're at goodseatsstillavailable.com. And all the other socials of note, including YouTube, by the way, where we also stream these episodes, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available, all one word. Again, goodseatsstillavailable.com. There's merch there for you. to consider. You could buy us a cup of coffee, proverbially. Whatever it is, you can offer up a little bit of thanks for a show that you might enjoy. We appreciate that very much. And of course, to our pal Jerry Payne for his audio excellence this week, and every week for that matter. We couldn't do this show without his help and expertise. And like I said earlier, this show is nothing without you listening out there, and we appreciate all the support you've given us over the years and many more episodes of fun and frivolity to come. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and ta-ta until then.